Mr. Gish.
My lady, the next witness is Mr. Matthew Gold. Could the witness be sworn, please?
If you'd like to repeat after me, I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gold. Thank you for attending today and assisting the inquiry. Just a few preliminary matters. If when you answer, you could direct your answers towards my lady, and secondly, if you could keep your voice up. There's a microphone in front of you, so if you speak into that, then you know that the stenographers can hear you for the transcript. Please do ask me to repeat anything if it's not clear. Now, Mr. Gold, you've helpfully provided a witness statement to the inquiry, dated 28th of March 2025, is that right?
Yes.
And you're familiar with it, you have a copy with you, I believe?
Yes.
And now, if you take a look at the last page of that statement, page 18, can you see at the end of the statement there's a statement of truth?
Yes.
And it essentially attests that all the facts within the witness statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief. Does that remain the case today?
It does.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Gold, if we could just start by talking a little bit about yourself and your professional background. You were, I believe, prior to 2019, a diplomat and a civil servant, and the Director General of Digital for the government.
Yes.
And the Director of Cybersecurity for the government.
Yes.
And then in May 2019, you were appointed the Chief Executive Officer of NHSX, following the announcement of the establishment of NHSX in February that year.
Yes, all that's correct.
Thank you. And you, in fact, remained the Chief Executive Officer of NHSX until the 31st of January 2022.
Yes.
So you were Chief Executive Officer during the period of the pandemic and the period with which we're concerned.
Yes.
And one of your duties, and the duty that we're going to talk about today, was to direct the development of what became the first version of the NHS app, a version we've been calling App 1. Is that
yes.
right? Because as we will hear, and as we have in fact already heard from other witnesses, there were in the end two versions of the NHS contact tracing app. App 1 was the first, and that was the one for which you were responsible, is that right?
Yes.
And App 2 was the second, and Simon Thompson, who we shall hear from later, was responsible for that development.
Exactly.
So if first we can just go through briefly what NHSX was, for those of us who may not be familiar. I've mentioned it was established in February 2019. It was a joint unit, wasn't it, of NHS England and Improvement and the Department for Health and Social Care?
Yes, it was a very unusual beast bureaucratically. So I was double-hatted as a Director General of the Department of Health and also a National Director of NHS England, both for digital transformation. The purpose of NHSX was essentially to drive digital transformation in health and social care. We saw our role as being to digitise, so to put in place the basic digital infrastructure, to connect, so to try and make sure that disparate data systems across health and social care could speak to each other, and then to transform, so using the digitisation and the connection to find new ways to deliver care more effectively.
Thank you. That summarises it perfectly, I think. I keep referring to NHSX in the past tense because it's true, it was actually retired, if I can use that phrase, or amalgamated into a different directorate in around November 2021.
Yes, actually, with my support and to some degree at my instigation, I'd come to the view that it was best, digital transformation was best driven actually as part of NHS England. So rolling NHSX, NHS Digital into NHS England was more likely to achieve the scale of change that was required.
Thank you. Now, I've mentioned we're going to go through with you the detail of the development of App 1. Before we go into that detail, I'd like to first start, if I may, with us setting out a chronology, effectively, of events over which you had responsibility, so that we can start with a clear picture of what occurred and
Of course.
when. So firstly, on or around 6th of March 2020, is it right that NHS Digital were tasked to assist with identifying vulnerable people who might need to self-isolate through contact tracing?
The request to NHS Digital was not actually primarily through contact tracing, but through filtering through medical records to find out those who had conditions that might cause them to be particularly vulnerable. So NHS Digital was separate from NHSX, although obviously we worked very closely together, and I was the so-called Whitehall sponsor of NHS Digital. That task wasn't, though, primarily a contact tracing task, it was a data analysis task.
Thank you. But the next day then, on the 7th of March, you in fact chaired a workshop in which you did discuss proposals for a smartphone app.
Yes.
And then it was only 2 days later or so that you and yourself and the Chief Scientific Advisor, Mr. Finkelstein, sent the Secretary of State a submission outlining your plans to investigate the viability of an app to support the response.
Yes, no, exactly. So this was moving very quickly. So we had a very initial meeting internally about the possibility of digital contact tracing on 6th of March, which was a Friday. On the Saturday, I convened at DHSC the first meeting to really work through the possibilities. On the Sunday, Anthony and I put together the advice to the Secretary of State, which was given to him on the Monday.
And then only about 2 weeks later, you had the first meeting of the COVID-19 Contact Tracing Board.
Exactly.
And what was the Contact Tracing Board?
So this was essentially in project management, you want to, the standard model is to have a senior responsible owner for the project, which in this case was a colleague from NHSX and a public health doctor called Dr. Geraint Lewis. And then sitting above the SRO, you'd have a steering board bringing together key stakeholders, me as the chief executive of NHSX, to provide oversight and challenge and make sure the project was being run properly.
Thank you. There was also an oversight board, wasn't there, which I think met 2 days later for development of the COVID-19 app. Were you involved in the COVID-19 oversight board as well?
Yes. So, I mean, I think it's worth saying we had an oversight board, and which I chaired, and we had an assurance board, which was a more technical group, which I wasn't on, but which reported directly into the oversight board, which included representatives from the National Cybersecurity Centre, people from Zulka Engineering, who we had contracted to provide technical assurance on the development of the app and so forth.
Thank you. 24th of March is a date I'll mention because you met with the devolved administrations to inform them of the work on the app.
Yes.
And was that the first time that you'd met with the devolved administrations to inform them of the work?
From memory, it was the first formal meeting. I think it is very likely, but I don't have chapter and verse, that we would have informally told them what we were up to before that.
Thank you. Then we get to April, and in April, on the 10th of April, Google and Apple announced that they were developing an application programming interface, an API, to allow for contact tracing through mobile phones. And it's right, isn't it, that they also approached the Department for Health and Social Care with a proposal to work together on creating an app?
Yes, so I got a call from colleagues at Google and Apple to say they were doing this and suggest we work together, which of course we then did.
You say you worked together, but meanwhile you were still developing App 1 separately, I think, from Google and Apple. Is that correct?
So essentially, and obviously we'll be coming on to this, but essentially what we did was, as soon as the Google and Apple API, so essentially a sort of data pipe from the phone, became available, we stood up a separate team to develop a version of the app that sat on top of the Google Apple API. So from that point, and actually I should say the team, we called it a technical spike team, that came into being 3 days before we had access to the Google Apple API. So as soon as we had that access, they were able to start developing on top of it. And essentially, we had two tracks from that point. We had a track which was using the Google Apple API with the technical spike, and then there was the original track which we carried on developing. Obviously, the one which was working on the Google Apple API was done in coordination with Google and Apple, but of course we carried on talking to them about the version 1, as it were, as well, not least because we were all exploring a novel technology, which was the use of Bluetooth to try and work out who was near you and how near. And the information was very much flowing both ways. So we shared, for example, quite critically, some work that we had done by colleagues at the Turing Institute to identify ways that you could use Bluetooth to more accurately assess distance. So there was a constant to and fro.
Thank you. That's helpful. Now, around this time, on the 4th of May, was a trial that we'll come on to talk about in some detail, but it was a trial on the Isle of Wight.
Yes.
And that was a trial of effectively the prototype of App 1. Is that correct?
Correct.
Then 17th of May, I think you were instructed to prepare a pre-registration scheme for App 1, so allowing people to sign up for the app ahead of its general release.
Yes.
And then by the end of May, you effectively had a working prototype of App 1 and a working prototype of App 2.
Correct.
And then we get to June, and it was on the 15th of June that yourself and Simon Thompson wrote a joint submission to Dido Harding and the Secretary of State, recommending that efforts be focused solely on the Google Apple API, so App 2.
Yes.
And from, I think, 3 days later, 18th of June, the Secretary of State accepted that recommendation. App 1 was effectively stood down.
I think from memory, the Secretary of State accepted the recommendation on more like the 15th or 16th, but then the announcement was on the 18th.
Oh, thank you. Some point after this, in June, some point between June and September, when App 2 was launched, you stepped back effectively, and Simon Thompson had the lead role.
Exactly. So I stepped back very soon after 18th June. It had been a sort of phenomenally busy, stressful, trying period. So I was really happy at that point to hand the reins over to Simon, who had, for the previous few weeks, been an important part of my senior team, and I had total confidence he would then be able to take forward version 2 in a really competent, effective and professional way, which he then did.
So that's effectively the chronology within which we're working. If we can sort of take you back now to early March,
Of course.
and particularly the 7th of March, which was the workshop that you chaired. That workshop, I think, included a number of members of Public Health England, expert scientists, technologists and academics.
Yes.
Now, at that stage, what was the purpose of developing an app? What was your motivation behind developing the app?
So the purpose had really been suggested by Professor Christoph Fraser, who I know you've heard from already in this module, who had looked at, in particular, what was suppressing the propagation of the virus in China, and had come to the view that the use by the Chinese authorities of an effective app-based contact tracing tool had been effective as a way of stopping the virus spreading, and had contacted me to propose that we should look at technology to do the same. So that meeting was an opportunity for him and his team to meet me and my team, colleagues from NCSC, colleagues from elsewhere across government, colleagues from Public Health England, and really start to chew over what at that point was a seriously novel concept as well as being a novel technology, which was if we went down this route, what it would involve, what the issues would be, what the technological basis might be. So it was very much the sort of initial brainstorming around what digital-based, smartphone-based contact tracing might look like.
Thank you. Now, when you move on to start developing the app, you started developing it in March, I believe.
So the sequence of events was, as I say, we met on the Saturday, the Sunday, and Professor Finkelstein and I put together a note which was sent on the Monday, 9th of March. That asked for a week to just do a very initial technical test to develop it and see where we got to. So really the development of it started pretty much immediately after that.
Now, was there much institutional accountability or oversight in the development, or were you effectively left to it?
So I would say actually we had right from the start the sort of project oversight and discipline that you would expect for a large tech or any sort of project. So we had a senior responsible owner, and a very capable public health doctor. We had an oversight board, which I chaired, which pulled together key stakeholders, Public Health England, etc. We had an assurance board, which I mentioned, which was a more technical oversight. We had Zulker Engineering, quite intentionally commissioned separately from VM Pivotal who were developing version 1 to provide an independent technical verification. We set up the ethical advisory board as well to make sure we were considering all the ethical angles. And then on top of which, all of which is I think, demonstrated in the various notes that came from the meetings we had with the Secretary of State, all of which was in turn reporting to ministers as well as being overseen by Number 10 and the Cabinet Office and so forth. So yes, we had I think a appropriate amount of oversight.
Can I ask, please? We've heard about a key feature of App 1 and App 2, in fact, which was that App 1 was centralised. And we've heard a little bit about what that means from Professor Fraser. But effectively, is it right that in a centralised app, all the data as to a person's contacts are held on a central server? Yes, in an anonymised way. So that is exactly the fundamental difference. The data that allowed people who had been in touch with a phone at somebody who then subsequently reported as infected would be held centrally through anonymized data in the centralized app on people's phones on the decentralized app. So were there privacy concerns if the data was anonymized? So we took a great deal of advice from the National Cybersecurity Centre, which published a couple of public documents. I think at least one is in my evidence pack, explaining why we thought those privacy concerns could be allayed, as well as from Professor Finkelstein himself, who was a sort of very leading sort of digital scientist. On one level, the decentralized app, of course, by definition, presents less grounds for concern around privacy. There was a trade-off, and this was a constant discussion which we had internally and externally. There was, of course, a trade-off between assuaging those concerns around privacy, which we believed the model we were developing
did sufficiently and ensured a level of anonymity which we felt was strong, demonstrable and appropriate. But on the other hand, the insight from the data that we would have accumulated on the centralised model, albeit anonymised, we thought would have enormous value as well. So there was a trade-off between the two.
So if I've understood you correctly, was the reason you went for the a reason you went for the centralised app, you decided to use that because you felt that you would have better data?
So at the time, we felt it was an appropriate trade-off, that the privacy concerns were we thought, amply met through on the basis that's set out in the National Cybersecurity Centre's papers, but that the benefits of having that anonymised, essentially an anonymised graph of contact events and infections would have given our colleagues in public health a great deal of insight about the spread of the virus. It would have allowed them to see how that spread changed in patterns and shape when certain interventions were taken. It would have allowed them to see sort of hotspots and particular patterns. It would have also allowed, through that insight, in principle, it would have allowed us to constantly tweak the algorithm that worked out what was a concerning contact event and what wasn't, because that insight into the contact events and subsequent infections would have allowed us to see, okay, if when somebody appeared to be in contact, for example, at 3 meters for 10 minutes, turned out that isn't so much of a problem, but 1 meter for 1 minute is much more of a problem. So it would the centralised approach and the insight it would have allowed would have come with, I think, some quite sharp advantages in terms of insight around how the virus was spreading, but there was a totally legitimate discussion to be had about the trade-off between the two.
Thank you. Now, if I can move on to ask you about your interaction with the devolved nations, so
of course,
Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We've heard that on the 24th of March you held a formal meeting, and of course you've said that you might have informally spoken to representatives from those nations before that. Was it your intention that or your hope, I suppose, that the devolved nations would adopt the app?
Yes, I mean, it was certainly our hope, because obviously it would have made contact tracing across borders more straightforward. And at a point when everyone was working absolutely flat out, it seemed to us sensible that we don't have duplication. As you know, what happened in practice was the Welsh government chose to adopt the version that we and then Simon's team developed. The Scottish government chose to develop a separate approach, and the Northern Irish government chose to use the approach developed with the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, so in relation to, as you say, Wales adopted the app, were there any efforts to collaborate or coordinate with the Welsh Government, NHS Wales or Public Health Wales in the development of the app?
So I think from memory, and I mean, I've set out my recollections as best I can in the witness statement. I don't have too much more to add to that, but from memory, we did maintain a sort of fairly regular and frequent dialogue with the Welsh authorities on exactly that.
And as part of that dialogue, were you taking into account things such as having the app available in Welsh or other Wales-specific issues?
I imagine we would have been. I have to say, I can't remember the precise details.
I know that Scotland and Northern Ireland didn't, in fact, use the same NHS app, but was there any coordination or discussion had with them in relation to the development of the app?
Yes, I mean, we did speak to our colleagues in both those devolved administrations, and in fact, before before the pandemic started, I'd initiated a coming together of digital health leads from all 4 nations on a regular basis. So we knew our counterparts and shared, and there was quite a healthy exchange.
Presumably, Northern Ireland, you can see the sense of that being with the same other part of the epidemiological, never say that word, unit.
Yes, my lady.
And therefore, in a perfect world, the epidemiological unit that is Scotland, Wales and England would have also been together. Is that your approach?
Yes, my lady. I think that's exactly right. It would have made, I think, good sense to have done it that way.
Do you know, you don't know, I suppose you can't help us with why Scotland and Northern Ireland chose to develop their own apps?
I think with Northern Ireland, it's more, it's clearer, although obviously the question is best put to them, but it was essentially that, as the Baroness has said, it made sense, given movement across the land border in Ireland, to have a single system covering both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Scotland, I don't understand that reason, no.
Thank you. That's just one more question then on devolved nations. At paragraph 41 of your witness statement, which is on page 11.
Yes. Yes.
At line 2, about halfway through the line, you say, in the end, the Welsh joined in with the adoption of the COVID-19 app that was rolled out in September 2020. And quite a specific question, really. You use the words, in the end. Does that mean that there was some reluctance or delay in Wales joining the app?
No, I don't think it, in the end, was intended to signify that so much as we had been discussing with all 3, but in the end, one came with us, one chose to brigade with the Republic of Ireland, and one did its own thing.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to please move on to ask you about your knowledge of another application that was being developed at around the same time as you were developing App 1. So we're looking back again at March and April 2020. And that's an app called the Zoe app. I think you know that Professor Timothy Spector is one of the co-founders of a science and nutrition company called Zoe.
Yes.
And in fact, you've seen his witness statement to this inquiry and have a copy of it with you.
I have.
So then you know, do you, that in early March 2020, Professor Spector and the team at Zoe had started development of an app designed to log symptoms, incorporate location information, and effectively let users know whether they might have COVID-19. Are you aware that by 21st of March 2020, Zoe had produced a version of their app on the Apple Store, and they launched it the next day on the 23rd of March?
Yes, I am.
And Professor Spector has told us in the witness statement that you've seen that within 24 hours, the downloads, in his words, went viral, and they had about 1 million downloads.
Yes.
And then he tells us this. I'll read it to you, but for yours and my lady's reference, it's at paragraph 16 of his statement at pages 7 to 8. And he says this, after the first day or two of the launch of the app, so the Zoe app, we saw that it was a success and we were getting very useful data back from participants that we knew would be useful. We made contact with the government with the initial intention of handing it over to them so they could run it as a UK-wide screening service to find out what was going on. And I'll just pause there so I can ask you some questions about that part, first of all, if I may. Do you recall whether you personally were involved in any discussion with Professor Spector or the Zoe team in relation to the Zoe app?
So we did have discussions with the Zoe team. I don't think that initial conversation where he says the intent of handing it over to them was with me or my team. But we certainly did have, as he sets out later in the paragraph, further discussions with them.
Can you help us then with whether NHSX did consider Professor Spector's, as he puts it, offer to hand over the Zoe app?
Yes, we did. I mean, look, first of all, I'm filled with admiration for what Professor Spector achieved, and it was a really impressive system that he developed. But I think it's important to make clear he was doing something different from the thing we were trying to do. He was developing a symptom tracker, did so extremely expertly. We were trying to develop a digital contact tracing tool. And so, although what he did was brilliant, it was a different thing from what we were trying to achieve.
Was the Zoe app something that you could have built upon and developed your app on top of the framework, if I can put it that way, that he'd already put in place?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think actually doing that would have been rather more work and complication. It's very important if you're building something like a digital contact tracing app, which is a sort of sovereign tool of the NHS, which has the purpose of telling people to isolate, so really has a sort of profound impact on people's lives, that right from the start it should be built to the very highest standards of security, which is why we had the National Cyber Security Centre experts in right from the start. I think trying to retrofit that on top of someone else's app built in a way which we didn't have insight into, without that same really sort of precise expert input from the National Cyber Security Centre, wouldn't necessarily have been a sort of saving or a helpful thing to try and do.
Does it follow that, as part of your discussions, was there any cost-benefit analysis, or did it not even reach that stage because the concepts were just so different?
It didn't reach that stage because essentially he was brilliantly doing something different. If he had developed a digital contact tracing tool, it would have made much more sense. But essentially, he was developing something that allowed you to put in your system, so your symptoms, so that there was a really helpful data around who had what symptoms and who then subsequently turned out to test positive for COVID. So, I mean, it's worth breaking down what the Zoe app had that could have been useful in relation to what we were doing. So first of all, it had the symptom tracker. Now, as I've said, we weren't developing a symptom tracker, we were developing a digital contact tracing tool. Had the CMO or the deputy CMO or SPI-M said to us, we need a symptom tracker, then of course we would have developed that, including through a proper analysis of whether we should build on the Zoe app and Professor Spector's achievements in building it. The second thing it had, which he refers to in his statement, is a wider set of symptoms that people could tick. Now, we were entirely directed on symptom set by the medical experts, the CMO and so forth. So on that, it's a straightforward sort of question for the medical leadership. The third thing he obviously had was a good number of users, and it was extremely impressive. But the truth is, as soon as the NHS COVID contact tracing app version 2, as it happened, was released, we had really impressive uptake. And Simon can speak to this later, but our uptake was in the tens of millions.
Thank you. That is helpful. I'll just go on to something else Professor Spector says in the same paragraph, paragraph 16. He says this a few lines later, so over the page on page 8. about 3 lines down. He says, the initial response of the UK government, NHSX, was not supportive. It was initially to try and see if they could stop us doing the app, because they were worried it would interfere with the COVID-19 app developed by NHSX, which was in the trial phase, and we were told that it would be released within 3 weeks to everyone in the UK. The rationale was that the public would be confused, and therefore our app would likely damage the major official effort. And he goes on to say, pressure was put on my university and funding bodies to make us stop promoting the app, though I have no written evidence. Because of this pressure, we organised a virtual meeting with many groups, including the head of NHSX, to reach a compromise. The outcome was we were allowed to carry on, but had to agree to stop as soon as the NHSX app was up and running, and agree to promote the future NHS app to our followers, who were by then over about 2.5 million people. So a fairly long quote, but first of all, do you agree with his written evidence there that you wanted them to stop development of the Zoe app?
No.
Had you taken any view on whether there was a benefit to allowing both the Zoe app and the NHS app to run in parallel?
So I'd say a couple of things. We didn't try to shut down the Zoe app. We did make the point that at that point it was claiming that it had the backing of the NHS. And we didn't think that was appropriate. We hadn't formally endorsed the app. There was a concern, which I think, in retrospect, I'm not sure was correct, but there was a concern that on the basis that we knew the success of the contact tracing app was sort of arithmetically linked to the number of users, if you had lots of COVID apps out there and people not being keen to have loads of different COVID apps, it could have affected the uptake of the digital contact tracing app. And so that was the basis for saying they should carry on at the point at which the NHS contact tracing app was released, could either consider rolling in or at the very least using Professor Spector's user base to encourage uptake of the NHS app. But in terms of running in parallel, I mean, it comes back to they were doing different things. They were different functions. And so we were focusing on digital contact tracing. He was focusing on tracking symptoms.
So you didn't want him to stop development of the app, but you were concerned, effectively dilution of the market, if I can put it that way.
We were concerned that people wouldn't want to have a multiplicity of COVID apps, even if they did different things. So it was important that we were clear about function, clear about what was being endorsed and what wasn't, and that we had an agreement that once the NHS app was released, then we would coordinate to make sure that one way or another uptake was driven to the highest level possible.
I see, thank you. Was there any, you've mentioned concerns about too many apps. Was there any thought about potentially the opposite, that if there was only one app, people might be reluctant to effectively feel directed to join that app? That if they have choice, they might be more willing to engage at least with one of the apps?
So, I mean, I'd say two things, and it's a very fair question. First of all, it is back to the point that they're apps doing different things. So they're both COVID apps, but ours was a digital contact tracing tool. Professor Spector's was not. It was a symptom tracker. So ours was designed to measure who was within range, which other phones my phone would be able to see, for what distance, for how long, and therefore, if I tested positive, who needed to be alerted to the fact that they may have been infected themselves. His app wasn't doing that. So a choice between the two is a choice between totally different things. The second thing to say is, it's in the nature of digital contact tracing and the way the technology works that you don't want competing apps, because what you want is everyone on the same system. Because if I'm on one app and you're on another, my phone sees yours, but you don't get a ping when I test positive because you're on a different system. That's actually a failure of the system. So it's one of those rare cases where you do actually, for digital contact tracing, you want one app in the same way you want one test and trace. It would have been really odd to have had two test and trace organisations to give people the choice. The same is true with the app.
Thank you. That's clear, I would say. We know, just a few more questions on the Zoe app.
Of course.
We know, I think, around April or so, Professor Spector indicates that the Zoe app did halt development due to, I think, a lack of funding, and that's at his pages 9 to 10, paragraph 19. But my question is really about the effect of the fact that the Zoe app had halted development around April, but there was no, as yet, NHS app. Did that mean that there was a period of time when the government was unable to effectively track emergence of new symptoms?
I mean, there were other ways of tracking. It wasn't just his app and our app, but again, it comes down to the fact that his app and our app were doing different things. So again, if the CMO or Jonathan Van Tam or SPIAM had said to us, we need a symptom tracker, then of course we would have taken their direction, and the conversation with Zoe and indeed our own work would have gone off in that direction as well, or instead. But of course we didn't receive that direction.
Thank you. Then just two more fairly discrete questions. The first is Professor Spector, I think, has told the inquiry that the Welsh Government, in fact, did adopt the Zoe app, and we know that the Welsh Government then went on to adopt the NHS app. Please say if you can't help us with this, but are you able to provide any insight as to why the Welsh Government decided to ultimately use the NHS app rather than the Zoe app? I know they were very different things.
No, I mean, again, it comes down to the fact that the NHS app was a digital contact tracing tool. The Zoe app was not.
And then I know that you weren't as closely involved or at all in the version of the app that was eventually launched in September 2020. So again, if you can't answer this, please do just say. But can you help us with whether there was any monitoring after the launch of the app as to whether any users who had used and trusted the Zoe app didn't then use the NHS app?
I think you're better directing that question to Simon when he appears later.
Thank you. Now, if I can move on, please, to the Isle of Wight trial, which, as we mentioned earlier, launched on the 4th of May. And that was a trial of App 1 amongst the residents of the Isle of Wight.
Yes.
First of all, why did you choose the Isle of Wight geographically?
So we had given this a lot of thought. It came with several advantages in terms of being a discrete test area. So for obvious reasons, it's an island with limited movement on and off at that time. There was a single health authority and a single local authority, which made for much simplicity in terms of organising it. And then, crucially, in terms of digital exclusion, it had a much higher rate of people aged above 65 than the national average. So it was useful in respect of one axis of potential exclusion or inequality. Recognise it wasn't useful on a number of other axes, which is why it was so appropriate that under Simon's leadership, the subsequent test was done with the London Borough of Newham. And I think a combination of the two was a very sensible one.
And in fact, there was, that takes us nicely, I think, onto our next question, which is, which will be helped by referring to the report of the
Yes.
results of the Isle of Wight trial. So if we can have on screen, please, INQ, thank you. And if we can look, please, at page 16 of that report. And it's the first paragraph. It is on your screen as well, if that
Great.
helps. But
Thank you.
Sometimes people prefer paper as well, so feel free to use whichever helps. The first paragraph says, age had an impact on the percentage of smartphone owners who said they downloaded the app, falling from 87% for those aged 55 to 69 to 79% for those aged 70 plus. Similarly, fewer smartphone owners with no qualifications downloaded the app than smartphone owners with GCSEs or equivalent, and it gives 78% as contrasted with 85%. Ethnicity also had an impact, with 87% of white smartphone owners saying that they downloaded the app, compared with only 77% of smartphone owners of non-white ethnicity. And then it goes on to say uptake was similar for key workers and non-key workers, and between genders, effectively
Yep.
it was about the same for males and females. While you were developing App 1, were you aware of these figures, these results?
From memory, yes. And I think, as it happened, these figures, because of the timing, mostly impacted the decisions taken by Simon and his team for App 2. So, for example, the multiplicity of languages that that app was produced in, and the wraparound support and so forth, was in part built on the insight that this gave us.
Did these figures concern you at all, given that even at that stage it was fairly well known that people over 70 and ethnic minorities were more likely to succumb to the effects of the virus?
So, I mean, yes, and I should say all the way through, from the very first note we wrote to the Secretary of State at the start of March, we flagged the risk of inequality and digital exclusion on the basis of the use of a smartphone-based digital contact tracing tool. And I think it's fair to say that that concern and consciousness of risk flows through literally almost every document in the pack. So it was a risk about which we were acutely concerned and alive.
And thank you. And we'll pick up the point about digital exclusion shortly. And in fact, to assist us, if we can look, please, at page 17 of this report, and the chart near the top, headed Reasons for Not Downloading the App. We can see that the largest reason, or the highest reason for those not downloading the app, is perhaps unhelpfully on its face labelled Other. But if we keep the chart on the screen and I just read out to you the reasons, the explanation given for Other on page 16, the report says the most commonly cited reason was not having the appropriate equipment. Many didn't have the correct operating system or were using phones that they didn't think would be compatible with the app. Additionally, those who didn't have mobile data or were on pay-as-you-go contracts were not keen to download the app or didn't think it would be useful. Another commonly cited problem was not having enough space on the phone to be able to download the app. So does that effectively demonstrate that your concerns about those who were digitally excluded were borne out in practice? Yes,
I think it does.
And then the second highest reason given for not downloading the app were people worried about privacy. We discussed earlier the fact that you'd chosen a centralised system and potential concerns about privacy. When you became aware of this feedback, did that impact your decision in the end to move to a decentralised system?
So as I said, that between the two systems there was essentially a trade-off and different equities in play. One, I think, had a sort of more reassuring story to tell about privacy, although I still maintain the centralised app had a very strong story all the same. The centralised app, though, gave the possibility of insight into the way the virus spread that could have been profoundly useful. Now, what we took from the Isle of Wight trial a message actually that even with those concerns as set out in this graph, the uptake was very high. I mean, really sort of gratifyingly high. So we didn't come away with the message that the privacy concern was going to kill the project. In the end, the decision to move from version 1 to what became version 2 was based on technical performance.
See, thank you. We can take that off the screen. Thank you. And moving on to version 2 briefly, we know that in June, as we've discussed, on the 15th of June, you and Simon Thompson both recommended that version 2 be preferred.
Yeah.
But version 2 had already been developed, is that right?
A sort of technical version, so it clearly wasn't a version that you would release to the public. The actual version was much better in all sorts of ways that Simon can talk about, but what it was the bare bones, so we could test one versus the other.
That may answer my next question, which is simply this. What was the reason for not moving to version 2 sooner?
So I think, and what it comes down to essentially is we did what I think you would have hoped we would have done, which is we developed version 1. As soon as the Google Apple API became available, we worked up a bare bones version to test one versus the other. We then developed both in parallel and then mounted a series of technical tests, one against the other, to check performance. And actually, I think comparatively, as far as we know, had one of the most rigorous approaches to testing efficacy between different models of any country, and it was on the basis of those repeated, very scientific tests of performance that we were able to come to a conclusion that the version based on top of a Google Apple API was more performant than version 1. But it made total sense in that period to develop both and test them against each other.
Thank you. And am I right in thinking that that Google and Apple had indicated from the beginning that they would be using a decentralized system?
Yes.
And so was that the primary reason that App2 was a decentralized system in the end?
Yes, because Google and Apple had said that their API, so access to the data, would only be available to those systems that conformed to certain standards that they had set out. So they had determined that no government or health service app should be able to have access to the API unless it was built on a decentralized version. They told us that they did that because they had concerns around how health data might be used in some countries. We asked them at the time if, despite that, given it was the UK and we had clear legal standards and checks and balances and assurance in place, we could nonetheless have access to the API for our centralized app, but they chose not to give it to us.
Thank you. Now, the last topic, I think, before we get on to the recommendations and your learning, is the topic of inequalities. And really, first of all, focusing on digital exclusion, which we've mentioned. So could I ask, please, to put on screen 279898, the third paragraph of that letter, please. Starting, we propose spending. Thank you. And this is the letter that we've referred to, dated 8th of March 2020, which is the letter from yourself and Mr. Finkelstein, Anthony Finkelstein, to the Secretary of State, copying in various others. So on the 8th of March, you said, we propose spending an exploratory week testing whether this, as in the app, is possible in a helpful timescale. You go on to say that you'll look at potential sources of data, the risks of false positives and other unintended consequences, and the level of uptake required for the app to be useful, the technical challenges of combining data sources, and producing meaningful analytics, data protection, public trust, consent, and other policy challenges. And then you say, including implications for the digitally excluded. So is it right that even as of the 8th of March, you were concerned about the digitally excluded?
Yes, and I mean, I think it's worth saying by way of context that when, at this point, the technology that we were proposing to develop was entirely novel. So using Bluetooth as a way of seeing who was around at what distance and for how long, it's not what Bluetooth was designed for. And so we were doing something really extraordinary, which was hence this talk about unintended consequences, because this was really new. In terms of the digital exclusion, I mean, it's a sort of unavoidable feature of digital contact tracing that if you're digitally excluded, you're not part of it. So we knew right from the start that by definition, a digital digitally based contact tracing system wouldn't be accessible to those without smartphones, those without level of comfort of using smartphones, those with old smartphones that weren't technically compatible with what was being developed, which is why I think we always knew that it was essential that any digital system of the sort we were developing should sit within a wider system which included manual contact tracing. So if it had been the app by itself, it would have been much more problematic. It made sense and was to some degree a mitigation for people without smartphones that it was within the context of a wider test and trace program. If I could make one other point, though, which I think is really germane to your question, it's important to note that the benefit of the app and the system we developed didn't accrue to the individual user. It was a societal benefit, because what it did was essentially, if you were a user, what you got out of it was a ping telling you had to stay at home for 10 days or whatever it was. The importance of it and the benefit was to society as a whole, because it was intended to remove people who might have had the virus from circulation so that the spread of the virus was reduced. So although there is a sort of serious question about digital inclusion, it is important to assess that in the context of the benefit being collective, not individual.
That is helpful. Did you, were you given authority, thank you, we can take that off screen. Were you given authority to proceed with that exploratory week?
Yes.
And are you able to help us with what the findings were in relation to the digitally excluded? Or
I think it was as I've just described, we as well as a sort of technical week of development, we spent a lot of that week considering exactly what we've just discussed and came to the view, number one, it had to be set within a wider context, a wider system, so it's not just a digital system. And number two, the main mitigation or defense of the system would be that the benefit isn't to the users directly, it's to society as a whole.
Thank you. And then just a final point on the digital exclusion. In your statement, paragraph 57, but you don't need to go to it unless you need to, you've mentioned developing the COVID Pass app, which isn't within the scope of this module, but the thing of interest that you say that is of interest to this point is that there was a non-digital element available to the COVID Pass app, which was launched before the digital version. Is that similar to what you're describing now, the manual contact tracing style?
Yes,
manual
exactly. So COVID Pass, the benefit was very much to the individual who held the app, because it was used to get into venues or whatever and show proof of vaccination. So it became really important that people who were digitally excluded could nonetheless get those benefits. So we made a point of developing a non-digital version of COVID Pass, which came in the form of a watermarked certificate sent through the post, which, as you said, we launched before the digital version on purpose to make sure that there was a version which could be used by anyone before we brought online a digital version.
Thank you. And one final question in relation to inequalities, a slightly broader question. Were you involved in any exercises to ascertain the impact of the app on those with protected characteristics or particular vulnerabilities?
So that was done, I think, well and properly by Simon and his team under version 2, who did a full equalities and health inequalities assessment before the launch of the app to the public. I think that was the right point to do that formal assessment, and I know that the outcome of that assessment informed his team's work.
Thank you. Now, just moving on to finally lessons learned and recommendations. You've set out very helpfully some lessons learned in your witness statement, and the inquiry does have that and certainly is taking it into account. There's one additional query in this point that I wanted to ask you about, and it relates to some evidence that the inquiry heard yesterday. The inquiry heard from Professor Ian Buchan yesterday, who described the Liverpool pilot, with which I think you're familiar.
Yes.
And he described difficulties he had in obtaining data from that pilot. He indicated that you were very supportive and of great assistance in helping him obtain that data, but it still took him about 8 months, I think. Do you have, first of all, what was your perspective of that situation? And second of all, do you have any recommendations arising out of that situation?
So this speaks to a much wider endemic problem across health and care, which is data flows very slowly and or can flow very slowly and incompletely between different systems. That's for technical reasons, which NHSX was trying to address. It's also for system and some quite deep-rooted cultural reasons across the system. If you are a healthcare professional, the way you see the world, from all you've heard and all you've read, is there is much more risk in sharing data than not sharing data. And it's something I used to talk to the Information Commissioner and to Dame Fiona Caldicott about often, was we were sitting on top of or next to a system where the incentives had all been not to share. And that was very dangerous, but particularly dangerous in a pandemic where you really need data to share, to be shared quickly. So, I think Professor Buchan's problem was symptomatic of a much wider and deeper-rooted issue. I think one of the things we did during the pandemic, which I think probably had the biggest effect, was a relatively straightforward thing, which is got together with Fiona and Elizabeth, the National Data Guardian and the Information Commissioner, and we just agreed we would put out a really short statement that said, effectively, if we are in a pandemic, if you are a healthcare professional and you share data sort of sensibly and in good faith, there will be no bad consequences. We're not going to launch enforcement action. So it's just a really strong jolt to the system that you can share data for the benefit of your patients if you need to. And we got a flood of feedback that this had really sort of electrified the sharing of data across the system. And I think in as much as there's a recommendation, it is the sharing of data saves lives. And particularly in the pandemic, the quick sharing of data is essential both for individual care and for optimizing the public and policy response. And so everything which allows that to happen is really important.
Thank you. That's answered my question perfectly. My lady, those are all my questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. We're very grateful. How did a diplomat end up doing the job that you were doing that we've been hearing about?
So when I was ambassador in Israel, one of the things I did was spend quite a lot of time working to build links in the tech community between Israel and the UK. So when I came back to the UK, I thought it would be fun and worthwhile to go down that route. So instead of going back to the Foreign Office, I asked to become Director of Cybersecurity for the government, and then the next 10 years of my career followed.
It sounds you've made good use of the skills that you'd adapted in the Foreign Office.
Thank
you
you.
very much. I'm sure it must have taken you many, many hours and a lot of personal cost to you and your family. So thank you very much for all you did to try and get the apps off the ground.
Thank you, my lady.
Thank you. Very well. I think it's best to break now before the next witness. I shall return at 3:05. Ms. Cartwright.
Thank you, my lady. Could Mr Thompson be sworn, please?
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thompson, I hope the wait to become our last witness of the week hasn't been too long.
It's been fine. Thank you.
Could you tell the inquiry, please, your full name?
My name is Simon Thompson.
Mr Thompson, thank you for the witness statement you provided to the inquiry. It's 23 pages, dated the 23rd of April 2025. We see your signature and statement of truth on page 23. And can I ask you to confirm that the contents of the statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Can we identify the relevant evidence you had to TTI and perhaps headlining it in the shortest way possible? You essentially had 5 months involvement developing App 2 that we've heard about.
That's right. 20 weeks developing App 2, yes.
And so let's just crystallise the dates, 3rd of June 2020 until the 19th of October 2020.
That's correct.
And would it be fair to say that once you left the project on the 19th of October, you had no more involvement in App 2?
That's absolutely correct.
And similarly, in respect of App 1, you had nothing to do with App 1?
That is also true.
Thank you. And so please can you just give the other relevant experience you have that is why you came to be seconded on this project, please?
Yes, sure. I have a long history in technology. During my time at William Morrison Supermarkets, I took them online. I'm an ex-Apple executive, and I also worked in the technology solutions organisation of Ocado PLC.
Thank you. I'm going to briefly take you to the handover that was given to you as you joined the project. Can we go to the organogram that's in the PowerPoint, please? Can I ask for it to be displayed, please? INQ 575,875. And it's internal page 5 to go to, please. Sorry, can we move along to page 7? I do apologise. I should have brought that. Thank you. Thank you. So this is part of the pack of slides that was part of the handover in June of 2020. And just to identify you in the organogram, we can see that you sit below the team below you that deal with the technology, the product, marketing and support. And then above you is Mr Bailey, and directly above that, Dido Harding.
Yeah, that's correct. And as it said there quite rightly, is that I was accountable for all matters relating to the app and all of the engagement with Apple and Google.
Thank you. And can I ask you, just once this is displayed, we can see stakeholders to the right-hand side and bullet points. We've got, first of all, fourth bullet point, other country app teams. And I think you were present in the hearing when Mr Gould was asked about uptake of the COVID app too and other countries. Are you able to assist us in terms of other country app teams? Did you have any liaison with any of the default nations from Wales or Northern Ireland or Scotland as part of the development of App 2, please?
Yes, for sure. I mean, we were in touch with the devolved administrations on a very regular basis. We continued an awful lot of the processes that Matthew covered off as well. And we also reached further afield. So if you take the check-in part of the app, which I suspect we'll cover off, that was actually developed for us by a team in New Zealand based on their experience. We were very interested in what other people had done that had worked.
Thank you. Now, perhaps the most efficient way to deal with your evidence as to the functionality and the development and implementation of the app is to use the slides just before you left from October of 2020. So again, could I ask please to be displayed INQ 575,876. So we know that this is your handover documents from the 9th of October, although you left the project 10 days later. And again, just perhaps because there's a more detailed organogram within this. Can we please go to internal page 34, please? And we can see 185 app cell total. Now, is that the individuals that were working on the development of App 2?
Yeah, that's the number of people that were dedicated to this initiative. It did not include some of the resources from devolved administrations and some of the resources that we would leverage. But this team was 185 people.
Thank you. And obviously, if we move to the right, we can see under what we do, your name, and then I think it's described as a tree that sits below it that then has the other aspects of the development of App 2, what we make it, assure it, approve it, adopt it, improve it, fix it and operate it.
No, that's absolutely right. So I think what it says here is absolutely right. My accountability was what exactly are we doing, the strategy, the outcomes, accountable for the decisions around the app, of course also working with the rest of the test and trace team and actually leading it to a conclusion. And what we can see here from the left to right, we had a team that were dedicated on making it. We call that product management. We had a team that made it. That was the technical team. We had a dedicated team to make sure that it met all quality standards and it was indeed secure. And then we had an approver team, which I think is a really significant part here. If you have a look at the general headcount across here, apart from the Make It team, you can see this is where an awful lot of the resources were input. This team here were largely made up of civil servants around governance, ethics, equalities, accessibility, because we felt that they were best placed to be the gatekeepers of what we gave to society. And then we had a team that was accountable for adopting it, making sure that it was downloaded and used. And then also making sure we had a team that were improving it. So every day we would look at user feedback. The Fixer team were dedicated and focused on making sure that the distance algorithm was accurate. And then we had an operated team that really managed all the infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, you have the benefit of, we've now heard two witnesses, both Professor Fraser and Mr. Gould a minute ago. So there's been a large volume of evidence that Her Ladyship has heard around App 1 and its functionality, and then what I'm going to describe as the privacy app, App 2, that was then ultimately the one that was implemented and available for downloading from the 24th of September 2020. And having said about the privacy app, there's been some discussion as to whether to refer to App 1 as the centralised app and App 2 as the more local app. How would you characterise App 2?
Yes, well, I think that the phrases centralised and decentralised are probably a little unhelpful because they are technological solutions. I think the way that I think about it, I think the team felt about it, was which technological solution was going to allow society and the people to feel confident that it was protecting their privacy. And that, to me, was the debate, was which would give the assurances of privacy, therefore was more likely to be downloaded and used. And I think from the Isle of Wight survey testing that Matthew and the team did, there was over 70% of the people that participated in that particular test initiative that felt or were concerned about the fact that they were being tracked. And in my view and in the team's view, that would be a negative to the product being downloaded and used.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that Mr. Gould deferred to you a moment ago, which was a question that was asked about the extent to which the app monitored after its launch app users under the Zoe app. I think he said you might be able to help us. Can you help us at all with how the COVID app looked at or monitored any data from the symptom tracker app of the Zoe app?
Two separate things.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's, using your slides, please, for functionality, can we please go almost near to the beginning at internal page 4, first of all, please, the role of the app. I'm not going to spend time on that because I think it's clear what the purpose of the app was. But again, we can see on that slide, speed, reach, precision. Can you just speak to what you intended this to communicate as you provided your handover, having implemented the app?
Yes, when we were reviewing is what did we feel the app could do particularly well versus other contact tracing methodologies. And we really felt that these three areas was something that digital tools could do better. The first one was speed, which is being able to get a notification to self-isolate in a matter of minutes. There was precision. So, of course, the tools that we built were good at understanding how close people were to each other and for how long, better than a human would be able to do, I would suggest. And in terms of reach, of course, the digital tool will remember people who you've met who you hadn't realized you'd met. So our view was that the app was better in terms of speed and precision and reach. But I think there's one really important point here to make as well, is that as good as the tool was at these three things, it was only ever designed to be part of an overall system. Within the test and trace strategy, there were 10 particular areas of focus, of which the app was one. It was number 6, really focused on letting people manage their freedoms and make the right decisions. So yes, the app was better at this, but it was also important that it sat within an overall system.
Thank you. Can we then go to the next slide, please? We can see slides that essentially give some indication of the functionality, but I think it's right, isn't it? The Geiger social distance score was not something that was then used on the app.
No, that's right. Geiger we didn't launch in the end.
And can you just summarise what that was and why it was dispensed with?
Yes, so what Geiger was about giving people even more information as to whether they were putting themselves at risk. I think later on in the pack that we disclosed, we did actually put that into research and people liked it. The issue that we had is that within the timelines that we had, that had a high degree of complexity in terms of development. So at that point in time, we actually didn't launch it. What I would say in terms of learnings for next time, certainly based on the consumer's feedback, I think that's something worth investigating again.
Thank you. That can be taken down, please. Can I then ask you, in respect of, we know that the app allowed you to book a test. It was the method by which you've been notified of a positive test. Is there any other aspects of the functionality you wish to touch upon? I think we've heard quite a lot of evidence about that already.
Yes, I mean, two things, if you don't mind. I think the first thing is that when we looked at general app adoption around the world, it was relatively low, with some notable exceptions that I think have been mentioned. And our view was that we had to have a situation where we got mass adoption of the app, so good take-up of the app. So the approach that we took was not just being privacy protecting and just a contact tracing app, was also giving the users some real benefits for themselves where it would actually drive adoption. So I think one that I'll really specifically pick out would be the check-in process, which really helped drive up adoption. Which is if you wanted to go out to a restaurant that, you had two choices, you could actually do a handwritten, I am here with, I would suggest maybe limited privacy protection on that. A lot of them were handwritten. But here, actually, you could check in a totally privacy protecting way, and I think that was a real big driver of general take-up. And of course, what we've seen, I think we've heard over the last few days, is that the higher the level of adoption, the higher benefits, or the more benefits the app would bring.
Thank you. We know also from your helpful statement that once you were told to isolate through the app, it had a helpful countdown function, which meant that told you when you were then released from your isolation.
That's right. And when we had a look at, when we spoke to the potential users, actually remembering how many days it was that you had isolated and how many days it was to go through isolation was not something that everybody could remember in a very clear way. So I think having that isolation partner that would count down 10, 9, 8, 7 to wherever it was, so that you were really clear on how long you needed to be isolated for, so that you did not spread the virus.
Thank you.
I thought was a really benefiting tool, yes.
Thank you. And then can you just clarify, my understanding is correct, that from the app being operational from the 24th of September, if downloaded, essentially, if you were told to isolate, there was no then requirement to, if you'd used the app, to have any dealings with a contact tracer through a centralised call centre.
Yeah, that's right. You followed the instructions.
Thank you. Now, can I just ask you a few questions on accessibility? First of all, your statement deals with engagement you had with Newham and Newham Council. Do you want to give Her Ladyship just the details of that and how that factored into AP2's development, please?
Yes, and I think Matthew mentioned a little bit about it before, is that, we'd done the work in the Isle of Wight, which, by the way, was totally invaluable in helping us accelerate with those learnings. We should really not ignore that. I think it was a very important part of the process. But one thing that really struck us as the team, is that, was the Isle of Wight truly representative of all of the communities around the country? And I think that the answer was probably no. So we reached out to Newham Council. I have to say, I'll take the opportunity of thanking Althea, the CEO, and Roxana, who was the MP there, who were absolutely tremendous in helping us engage with the local community. And we went there and spent an awful lot of time really understanding some of the barriers to potential app usage. There was a few that really immediately struck me. One was the multicultural nature of that particular community, which is why we ended up launching in many, many languages. And I will say here that having an app in multi-language is painful, very, very difficult to develop and also difficult to test at speed, but incredibly essential in terms of this response. We also learned many other things as well. We made sure that the app was available for reading age 8 and above, which again is going to give people the access that they want as well.
Thank you. Now, can I, again on accessibility or usability, it's a separate question linked to the devolved nations, because you tell us in your witness statement the hope had been to launch AP2 before the Scottish holiday, the Scots went off their holiday and the children back to school, which is early in August of 2020, and obviously Scotland then developed their own app. Is there any observation you can give about accessibility from the Four Nations perspective? Because we have obviously Wales that was part of this app, but then separately we've got Scotland and Northern Ireland with different apps.
Yes, I think interoperability is very, very important. And the way I characterise it is I am living in England and I travel to Scotland and I meet some people in Scotland and then I travel back to England and then I test positive for the virus. How can we make sure that the people that I've interacted with in Scotland can be notified that they are potentially at risk? So my view was and remains today that actually having one app that is interoperable, or what would be even more preferable is not needing the interoperability, actually having one app as part of the response, I think would have been a much better approach.
Thank you. Now, I'm not going to take you to the documents unless it would help your understanding, but we have within the documents provided to you information that confirms that the accessibility of the app met the level AA success criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Excuse me. Are you able to help us then? Because if you go to the underpinning guidelines in respect of AA and AAA, it obviously doesn't meet the highest standard of the AAA. And can you help us as to why the app was only developed to meet the AA rather than the AAA standard, please?
Yes, well, the first thing is just picking up on that particular, that definition of that standard. Those standards are set on a global basis by an independent organisation. They are to make sure that there is accessibility of the app. I mean, one example I'll give is that if you're using a screen reader on the app, that would actually work. We took a judgment call that getting to that standard, which was a really good standard, within the timeline that we had, would mean that we would accommodate the vast majority of needs that would be out there. And I think one other thing to add as well is that before the app was launched, we also did a public sector equality duty test as well, just to make sure that as many people as possible were going to be able to access the app. But I'll say again that the app was never going to be the total solution. It was one part of an overall response.
Thank you. And you've just mentioned the public sector equality duty consideration. You say we. In fact, was it you that completed that?
No, it was not me. It was not me. But within the team, we had a very, very dedicated team that were looking after the equalities and all of the parts of government requirements before you put a tool such as this in their hands. And as I said before, I would not say that that is my expertise. It was certainly their expertise, and that function was predominantly staffed by people from the civil service.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask for us briefly to look as well at the launch PowerPoint that identifies issues of accessibility that were looked at, please. It's 575873. So it was the campaign activation slides that you provided. And again, just on accessibility issues, please, having identified that, thank you. Can we move to internal page 5, please? I think we can see there, certainly in terms of targeting, Black, Asian, minority ethnics is part of the target that's been considered for the launch, for uptake of the app. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. Now, I would say this is the first time I have seen this slide, so I am reading it freshly here, but that does meet with my understanding.
Thank you. Can we then move to internal page 8 of that document, please? These slides also suggest that there've been work done by way of onboarding with local authorities in community settings, and in particular of significance, trusted voices.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think I did cover off in my statement the number of people that we spoke to on a very, very regular basis to make sure that when the app was launched, that it would have the right level of engagement. I think one of the things that we definitely learned in Newham is the power of local advocates to get the app downloaded was incredibly important, as well as central messages. And we made sure that we had trusted voices across many communities and within many organisations, feeling that they understood what the app was about and they understood why it was a benefit for their area of interest.
Thank you. And then finally for these slides, please, the internal page 17, please, which I think also identifies, thank you, there's thought process again in terms of with engagement with TV, radio, social that had bespoke content that would obviously make the knowledge of the app go as widely as it needed to do for download.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, including an awful lot of videos that were put on YouTube and through other digital channels actually explaining very clearly how it is that the app worked, yes.
Thank you. That can be removed, please. Now, can I then please see if you can assist us with a broader review that was part of research that we looked at with Professor Fraser that deals with the really positive things, but then there's also an issue I want to see if you can help us with is around download or use in Wales. I'm going to go first of all, please, to INQ 509696, internal page 6, please. That's 509696, internal page 6. Thank you. Could it be expanded so it shows the graphs and the two maps of England and Wales? Mr. Thompson, you tell us in the witness statement about the successes to downloads. Could you do the top graphs first of all, please, A, B and C? They're shown on the graphs themselves, but do you want to just confirm the success of the download, but also the very meaningful difference it made in many areas?
Yes, I would like to. I think that, to get 18 to 19 million downloads was a great success. We set ourselves a target of making sure that people felt that their privacy was protected and it had daily usability. So I think to get to that level of people downloaded was great. And I saw this the other day, and I know that Professor Fraser went through it. I think, a million infections, say 44,000 hospitalizations and 9,600 people, deaths averted. I would like to take the opportunity of thanking the team that worked on both App 1 and App 2 to actually get these results. Of course, we would have all wanted more, of course.
Thank you. And can we now please go to the maps below? Is there any additional comment or input you can provide as to what's shown here as to map D, which is the estimated cases averted and the different impact or uptake, or the estimated percentage reduction in cases in map E? Can you assist at all with anything there?
Well, I think it's got me curious. The technology itself is the same for all of these areas. The features and functionality are the same for all of these areas. Yet for some reason, and I think it's important that we understand what that reason is, it clearly had some different levels of uptake. The first time I saw this document was just the other week, but I can understand why it is that you're showing it to me here now, and I think there are clearly some learnings in here that perhaps we haven't quite got to yet.
Thank you. And in terms of that, you say we've not got to yet, but it's not within your portfolio. Would that be correct?
No, that's correct. I mean, I was with the app, as I'd said, for that 20 weeks. There was 3 weeks whilst I was leading the team when it was initially launched. I think this reporting came sometime after.
Thank you. And then please to move in the same document to page 2, where we see another map that I want to see if you can assist at all with an issue of, thank you, particular interest. Can you expand the map again, please, at the top? What seems to be a significant trend identified for Wales around the usage of the app. Are you able to help us as to any understanding of why we see the sort of almost widespread uptake of the 16 to 20%, apart from what seems to be one area of yellow? Can you help us to that trend that seems to be very particular in Wales?
No, I think Professor Fraser described a couple of days back as striking. I agree, it's definitely striking. I think it's important that that's understood. I can't add anything today, but what I would offer is if I could help in understanding what it is that drove that, then I would be more than happy to support.
Thank you. Can I then ask you if you could provide whatever recommendations or learning, they're detailed in your statement, that you'd wish to provide to her ladyship in the context of your knowledge and experience, please?
Yes, I would. I think that there were many things that we learned. I think the first thing that we really learned is that confidence and privacy is really critical for foundation of app adoption. But I would just add a couple of other data points, if you don't mind. I think that when we launched the NHS COVID app, the actual NHS app, the one that gives you access to services, only had 1 million downloads back then. When we look at that app today, it's got 34 to 35 million downloads. That's almost 2/3 of population. That's an incredible change in 5 years. I think the other thing that I would say as well is that Generation Z, who have actually been brought up, they're probably the first generation that have been brought up in the pure digital age. They're approaching 28 and 30 years of age. In 10 years' time, they will be deciding things, very much so from a leadership perspective. And I think also on the privacy side of things, that if you have a look at what is now the norm, some 5 years down the line, in terms of what people are prepared to share, in terms of their location, who their friends are, their videos, it almost appears that they're more comfortable living in that digital world than perhaps the world that I'm more used to. I think those 3 things are incredible differences for anybody that would be looking to develop an app today. I think a couple of other things just to pick up. I think that as technically challenges as it was, I think multi-languages and accessibility were absolutely key. I think is very important. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, developing one app for the whole of the UK would be my very, very strong preference.
Did you ever find out why Scotland had a separate app?
No, it irritated me, but I moved on. And I think also, as I said, I think it's very important that the next time a response like this is required, is that we've taken the learnings from now and we are more prepared.
Thank you. And I think you've already said as much, but one of the things you wanted to make clear within your statement is a formal thanks to all of those involved in the development of App 1 and App 2.
Yes, please. It was difficult. It was a very difficult time. And a big thank you to everyone that was involved.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Thompson, I've got one question that I'm asking that permission has been given to FEMHO, a core participant who unfortunately can't be here. So I'm asking the question on their behalf that they've been given approval for. So could I ask you, how was the NHS COVID-19 app's functionality and intended use communicated to the public? And was this messaging adapted to meet the needs of underserved communities?
I believe it was.
Thank you. My lady, that having been said, there are questions for other core participants.
Certainly. Just before Mr Stanton, who's over there, asked this question, going back to the point you made, Mr Thompson, about the downloads of the NHS app going up from 1 million to 34 to 35 million, do you think that that is largely attributable to the fact that people got used to using an app during COVID?
That would be my view. I have no data to support that, but I think that
because I've done the same. I'm just wondering whether I was encouraged to do it because I have an NHS app.
But I think it gives a very different starting point next time in terms of how a response could be potentially done. Because one of the things that is really, really important is that people trust the technology. And I would suggest that there's now 34, 35 million people, I think my numbers are right, that trust that app.
Booking a test, which I obviously, given my advanced age, I'm allowed to do, is really easy. Is that part of the system that your team developed, or is that the NHS app development?
I'm not sure of the current functionality, so I can't answer the question on the current one. But what we did embed within the COVID-19 app is that if you did a check on the symptoms and it came, then you could actually book a test straight away. And then you would go and do your test, but the results would actually come straight back to the device. I think that making that really easy and very seamless, I thought definitely drove some good upside, I think.
Thank you.
My lady, I apologise to you. There's two other strands of the questions for FEMHO I haven't asked, so could you permit me to complete that?
Sorry, Mr Stanton, you'd have to stay seated for a bit.
Mr Thompson, these are other questions that my area I've not asked on behalf of FEMHO. Can I ask you additionally, were specific efforts made to reduce minority ethnic populations or communities with historically lower levels of trust in government-led health interventions?
I'm not actually sure how to answer that question. What I would say is that from our perspective, we delivered something that was going to be inclusive for as many people as we could find. That was absolutely our focus, whether it was through a public sector, a quality duty process, or whatever else it was. So we worked very hard to make sure as many people could access us as possible, accepting that it was part of a system, and that system had to accommodate everybody.
Thank you. And then finally, on behalf of FEMHO, how were concerns regarding data privacy and potential surveillance, particularly among communities with reasons to be cautious about state technology, anticipated and addressed in communication strategy?
There was no surveillance. There was no risk of people's information being given us. And that is why we took the route that we took.
Thank you, and with apologies to you, my lady.
Thank you. Mr Stanton now, please.
Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon, Mr Thompson. I ask questions on behalf of the COVID-19 bereaved Families for Justice Cymru. I just have one question, the context of which is the map that you were shown earlier and the apparent disparity in uptake between Wales and England. And I note you've already answered very candidly that you're keen yourself to understand why there should be such a difference. But could I please ask you, and having regard to the fact that you indicated you were in regular contact with devolved government, can you recall whether there was any engagement with the Welsh Government specifically on issues or problems in Wales that might relate to the slightly older population in Wales or particular issues of digital exclusion in Wales?
We applied the same principles across the whole of the areas that we went, and I've articulated the things that we did. I think in terms of engagement of the devolved administrations, I think our relationship with Wales and the people had there were excellent, and we did make some changes based on their requirements. You know, they had a different look and feel for their particular campaign. We did, the Welsh language from launch. And if there was a different application of the health rules within Wales, then we made sure that the app could accommodate that. So that's the work that we did. I don't ever recall having a conversation on the particular topics that you've articulated, but I'll say again, looking at the information that was presented by Professor Fraser, it is striking. It's the word he used, it's striking. And I am happy to participate if I can help. But I think it's really important we understand why that is striking.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Ms. Munro, I think you have some questions.
Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon,
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Thompson. My name's Alison Munro. I ask questions on behalf of COVID bereaved families for justice. Just two questions, and in fact, you touched upon some of the points, or the main point indeed, in answer to questions from my lady just a little while ago. And just to put my questions in context, now I know you're up to, but at the end of the Isle of Wight pilot, there was a report, and amongst the things that they looked at and evaluated, it was noted that although 1,592 people had reported symptoms via the app, only 309 home test kits were actually ordered. So that discrepancy was obviously very marked. There doesn't seem to have been a definitive answer as to why, although it's suggested in the report that the discrepancy, quote, may be because people were using driving test centres instead, or they were entering symptoms to the test app to see what happens. In terms of concentrating on app 2 then, would you agree, Mr. Thompson, that in relation to the app and the effectiveness of contact tracing on an app, it relies not just on reporting symptoms, but on prompt action to be taken, such as testing? There's a clear link, isn't there?
Yes, I would say that yes, yes, I would believe that.
So, in terms of, and as I said, you touched upon this with Her Ladyship. So in terms of App 2, what our families that I represent are particularly concerned about is whether that link was properly examined in the development of the app, because I don't know, and it may be that I missed it, whether there was a similar reporting thereafter to see what was the correlation between people tapping in, I've got symptoms, and actually following through with a test.
I don't have that information to hand. What I would also say is that the app was privacy protecting. So if people actually had a symptom checker and said that, please go and check, I don't know, we don't know whether they actually went and did it in a different process. So I think because of the privacy protecting nature, I think the insight that you're after might be a little bit hard to get to, but I think there's no reason why we can't take your question as a takeaway from today and see whether we can get a better answer than one I'm giving you today. I can't give you a definitive answer. I think that the question I have is because of the privacy protecting nature of App 2, whether that answer can be given. But I totally understand why you're asking the question.
Thank you very much, Mr.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Munro. That completes the questions that we have for you, Mr. Thompson. I don't know if you heard what I said earlier to Mr. Gould, but thank you very much indeed for all that you and members of your team did to try and get these apps off the ground. I'm sure it took a lot of long hours and hard work, and so I'm sure we're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very
Thank
kind.
you for helping the inquiry.
You're welcome.
10:30 on Monday.
Thank you, my lady.
Thank you all.
All right.